The faces in the stone. This is a legend from the far west of Ireland in two parts. The first tells of an act of sorcery unleashed 700 years ago against two barefoot wildling children. The second uncovers how that enchantment was broken by a stroppy teenage surfing addict called Kyle from Ballinskellig, who up until that point had reckoned that magic was complete rubbish and wanted nothing whatsoever to do with it. This is part one. It's called The Silver and the Red. The sea storm screamed down the coast of Western Ireland on a dark November night 700 years ago. As it passed over Ballinskellig village, two babies were battling their way into the world. They were born to different mothers within minutes of each other, between a clap of thunder and a flash of lightning. One boy, one girl. Huts were losing their straw roofs to the winds, flimsy dried mud walls being blown flat as terrified goats and chickens ran crazy loose, children cried and men swore. So the newly delivered women were carried, wailing and clutching their babies, to the elegant little abbey that stood on the edge of the beach, its back to the land and its face to the raging Black Sea. So close to the water's edge, in fact, that on nights like these the waves washed its very walls, spattering its stained glass windows with the salt kisses of the ocean, and making the abbot wonder for the millionth time why his predecessor had built it in such a stupid place. The abbey had faced down both Viking invaders who came roaring across the water riding long ships with dragon prows, and the soldiers of local chieftains, little better than brigands who pillaged and raided when their own supplies of goats, weapons and women ran low. That building's walls were so thick, and its doors so strong that none that sought refuge there had ever been harmed. What was more, its Benedictine monks might have been men of God, but they also found it wise to become decent shots with a bow and arrow, pointing out that prayers were all very well, but the Lord helps those who help themselves. Nor were they above pouring boiling water, cheerfully chanting psalms in Latin, from the abbey tower down onto the heads of the hairy marauders below, who up until that moment had never imagined that a bunch of balding, whey-faced prayer merchants in skirts could possibly give them any trouble. The infant Stormborns were named Geraldo and Madrigal, and the village thereafter blamed the circumstances of their birth for the way they grew up, disobedient, rebellious, and afraid of absolutely nothing. The children had swift feet, the curiosity of cats, and rebel tongues that were never still. "Look! Did you hear? Did you see that? What's that? Can you eat it? My turn! Follow me!" The woods rang with their excited voices as they climbed trees, fell out of them, teased wild boar, stuck their hands in wasps' nests, slid down foxholes, rolled in river mud, argued with their elders, and stuffed so many berries that their mouths turned purple. Geraldo had the grey eyes of a watchful wolf cub and silver blonde hair. The madrigal's caught fire when the sun struck it, and her dark blue eyes were centuries older than her years. Celtic wildlingers, they had no schooling, had dirty necks and horn-hard feet from running barefoot through the forest all day. Their mothers could never find them when there was work to be done, and would call in vain for the children to take their rightful turn at wood gathering, rabbit skinning, water drawing, or forcibly delousing the younger members of their families. Lazy, feckless, the village called them, and worse, as they routinely cuffed and scolded the pair for unauthorised absences and general cheek. Their parents existed in a permanent state of exasperation. How could they be raising such useless wild hearts and feralings when the rest of their children were so helpful and obedient? Then one spring, when the pair were only 9 years old, it started raining as it does only in Ireland. Down it came in great grey sheets, battering the earth and pounding the sea. The only noise louder than that rain was the sound of Geraldo screaming. He had fallen headfirst down a sea cliff, trying to coax a passing puffin closer with a scrap of dried fish, and was lying, with a splintered leg, bloodied head and broken ribs on the beach 60 feet below. A beach accessible only by boat. As the day wore on, his voice began to fail and he slipped in and out of consciousness, frozen by the rain, mind wandering, eyes closing. His throat was ripped raw by shouting, his shattered leg burned and his ribs stabbed with every breath he took. So he shouted out in his head instead with every atom of his remaining strength, "Madrigal! Madrigal! Help me!" 3 miles away, Madrigal, who had spent an exceptionally tedious day helping her mother and sisters stuff mud mixed with straw into the gaping cracks of their family's hut's roof, stopped dead. Her hands were full of mud goo and her head was on one side like a listening animal's, her midnight eyes staring at something the others could not see. "What?" demanded her mother. "What's the matter with you?" "Geraldo," she replied quietly. "I think he's hurt." "Ugh, what makes you say that? More like he's not here because he's been made to do something useful for once, just like you," grumbled her mother, wiping hair out of her own eyes and leaving a great muddy splodge across her cheek. "Oh, get on with your work, if you please. The rain's still pouring in that corner over there. I want this finished by nightfall. And I'm telling you, there will be no supper for anyone round here until it's done." Madrigal took no notice, but simply wiped her muddy hands on the wall and ducked outside into the teeming rain. "And just where do you think you're going? Come back here this minute!" But her daughter was already heading for the beach, where she tucked up her skirt and dragged the little coracle boat her father used for fishing into the water. But inside her head, Geraldo's voice was getting louder. "Madrigal! Wolf's sister! Down here!" Squinting through the driving rain, she paddled furiously round the coast to the next cove, guided by an instinct for which she had no name. The child's hair hung like a nest of mouse tails. Water streamed into her eyes and her dress was soaked. "Hang on, Wolf brother," she thought back to him. "On my way." 20 minutes later she was wading up the beach, dragging the little boat behind her, wet scope billowing and tugging in the sea, running to her friend and throwing herself on the ground beside him. He opened one eye, then passed out cold. This was fortunate, for it meant he never did feel the pain from his injuries as the little girl dragged him back to the boat, and somehow, she could never remember exactly how, heaved him in and paddled back to the abbey on the beach as fast as she could. She staggered into the courtyard, sodden and shouting, returning moments later with 2 monks carrying wooden planks which they lifted Geraldo onto and then followed them into the infirmary. The little girl watched, fascinated as the monks swathed her friend's leg tightly in flax fibres, soaked in comfrey tincture, wrapped the whole thing in thick protective felt, and then strapped it all to 2 pieces of wood, finally binding his ribs with reeds and strips of linen. The elderly monk caught Geraldo's hopeful look and nodded curtly. 3 moons. Oh, minimum. Hours later, Madrigal sat by him chewing a chunk of bread and sipping warm goat milk, surrounded by Geraldo's entire family of 2 parents, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, 4 aunts, 4 uncles, 14 cousins, 1 teething baby whose nappy needed changing, and a seriously muddy dog, all making a very great deal of noise. But relieved as he was, the boy's father had something on his mind. Madrigal," he began, looking at her with an unsettling mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "Our family is very grateful to you. Very grateful indeed. You saved our son, child. And for this we truly bless you from the bottom of our hearts. But what I want to know is, how did you know where to find him?" Madrigal shrugged, then looked shifty. Geraldo, who was feeling considerably better thanks to the poppy juice mixed into his own cup of goat milk, grinned dopily, but shook his head very slightly at her. The parents looked expectantly from one to the other. "Well?" The children exchanged a lightning look. How are they going to explain this one? We're not, said a voice in both their heads at once. So they didn't. Thereafter, they often voiced each other's thoughts or heard each other's words when none were spoken aloud. Yet they kept their gift a secret. In the village, there was now far less talk of the pair being lazy and feckless too, especially after they had somehow restored the hamlet's water supply when the well ran dry, cured the headman's cows of a deadly colic which looked set to kill the lot of them, and persuaded a very disruptive ghost to leave a neighbour's hut and go back where it came from. When asked how they had managed such things, especially the ghost, the children just looked vague, but added that the ghost had been easy, for they just talked to it. Farsighters, fairy-touched, elf-led, people began calling them, and started slipping them treats. A neck thong with a pretty metal bead on it for Madrigal, a chunk of honeycomb, a new leather tie for Geraldo's knife, and letting them off at far more work than was good for them. Elf-led? Yuck. More witch-taken and moon-dazzled, if you ask me, sniffed the local midwife suspiciously, who also served as local matchmaker, wise woman, old bat, and all-round resident crone. Those two might turn out useful one day, though frankly I really don't see how unless one of them manages to get lost again. Or they'll bring us a whole dunghill of trouble. You mark my words. Geraldo and Madrigal said nothing, despite the resident crone's pursed lips. She always looked like she was sucking sloes whenever she spotted them, and the curious glances that came their way from everyone else. Because though they didn't think it was a good idea to mention it, each other's thoughts weren't the only things they could hear. For they ran with wolves, knew the language of bees, and could tell from the colour of dawn how soon spring would come and how brightly. They could hear messages in the way that yew trees grew, smell water, scent storms, and feel the hot prickle of danger long before it arrived in person. Then one day, when they were only 10 years old, something happened. Something pretty creepy. Geraldo was sent by his father to get 3 ells of reed rope from a man in Skellig Mary, the next village 5 miles away, in exchange for a sturdy leather bucket Geraldo's cousin had made. It wasn't actually raining, which meant it was a positively lovely day for late November on the wild Atlantic coast. He'd got barley bread in his pocket, the family dog at his heels, and Madrigal, as usual, by his side. So they sang as they walked along, picked up interesting stones, threw sticks for dog, spoke with a robin, and generally enjoyed themselves. But arriving at the village, thirsty and hoping for some water, both stopped in their tracks. "My skin's tickling," muttered Geraldo with a shiver. "So's mine," whispered back Madrigal. "Something's going to happen here, isn't it? Something not good." "Not good? No, it's bad. Really bad, I reckon. We have to tell them." Unfortunately, the villagers had no time for 2 tousled 10-year-olds with dirt up their nails and warnings on their tongues. Despite Madrigal's pleading and Geraldo's arguing, which eventually turned into an all-out shouting match because no one would listen. But the noise they made reached the ears of the village's head man, who was sharpening knives on a whetstone in front of his hut. An old knee injury was hurting him today, and he was not in a very good mood. Yet he pricked up his ears when he heard raised voices and saw the pair being pushed away impatiently by the man in the dwelling across from his own. The headman watched with narrowed eyes and realised he knew these two. Well, knew of them anyway. His cousin was married to one of Madrigal's mother's 5 sisters, and word had got around the district about these children. Red hair, silver eyes, strange talk. It was those Farsighter cubs. He limped over stiffly and tapped them on the shoulder. "What's all this?" They explained as best they could. "So you see, it's ever so important you come with us, sir," finished Geraldo breathlessly. "Look, you know our village, right? It's only little, but we've got 14 huts and a barn you could share." Just for a couple of days, urged Madrigal. We'll help you carry your stuff and everything. Then if nothing happens, you can just come back home and you won't have lost anything. Pfft, only 3 days good work and the last decent weather we'll get this year, grumbled the headman. Winter's coming. Or hadn't you heard? Oh, push off, will you? We've got no time for your fairy tales. The children's shoulders drooped in defeat. But as he turned to go, Madrigal suddenly noticed that Geraldo had gone white. What is it, Wolf Brother? What do you see? A mouth, he whispered. A great dark mouth. It's opening. It's opening wider and wider. Where is this mouth? It's here. Despite himself, the headman felt like a chill of cold air had passed over his heart, the very faintest of breaths. He hawked, spat over his shoulder and sucked his teeth for a minute. Yeah, there it was again, that coldness. He shivered and looked at the children more closely and saw not a desire to cause mischief, but only fear and sincerity in their upturned faces. The man scratched his backside and sighed. A couple of days, just to be on the safe side. At least it wasn't far. Oh, all right, since you make such a point of it. And anyway, you'll have already worried the women here witless with your stories, so none will sleep sound tonight if we stay. Madrigal and Geraldo nodded vigorously. But if you're wrong, I will personally see to it that your backsides are turned so thoroughly you don't sit down for a week. In the end, all but one household, a young couple, their 3 children and the man's elderly mother, followed Geraldo and Madrigal back, the boy sprinting on ahead to warn his village they'd be having visitors. A bed space was found for every man, woman and child to put their blankets. Extra barley and roots were thrown into cooking pots, visiting goats and sheep tethered beside existing residents. All new hens corralled behind a hurriedly woven withy fence. And the village settled down for the night. 3 days later, Skellig Mary's headman returned to his village. Geraldo, Madrigal, their father, plus the oldest, wisest man from their own hamlet who had a bad feeling that he couldn't explain but equally seemed unable to ignore, were at his back. At first things looked exactly as they always had, but quieter. Too quiet. There were no birds singing, not a breath of wind. And where was the family who had chosen to stay behind? No one felt much like calling out to them. So the headman very cautiously opened the door to their hut a few inches. His eyes took a little time to adjust to the dim interior. But when they did, they revealed there was nothing there apart from 5 piles of clothes lying on the floor. Each had what appeared to be a handful of sticky grey ash in its centre. Of the 5 family members who had lived there was no sign. Outside, the children fidgeted uneasily. Something's watching, muttered the boy, looking warily right and left, and it's not happy. The headman went from hut to hut, checking for damage or theft, and then finding none, ducked around behind the cow barn, intending to take a drink from the spring there that had watered his village for generations. He was shocked to find that the well, clear and bubbling high only 3 days before, was drier than a sun-bleached bone. And that feeling of being watched lasted all the way back to the children's own village, for they were indeed being spied upon, watched by the hungry ones, and these beings were most displeased. Pristine water and delicious human energy was what these creatures liked, and they'd been helping themselves to both for centuries on the quiet. Springs, streams, out-of-the-way wells, a hamlet here, a lonely farmstead there, sometimes the inhabitants of a small hillside watchtower. On occasion, an entire village, provided it was well off the beaten track. The hungry ones had been all set to feast on the village of Skellig Mary. Yet thanks to the interference from 2 grubby, half-wild children, they had been cheated, yes, they felt cheated, out of their feasting and left with what? A pathetic 5 humans, 3 of which had been very small indeed and barely worth bothering with. The hungry ones had no proper name, or at least none that anyone had ever heard spoken aloud. Shapeless, formless, they came from far beyond and lived cloaked in darkness, having strong wills but no bodies, thoughts but no minds, longings but no souls, and hunger. Always their hunger. After they'd visited a place, no one could ever understand what had happened. Empty houses, piles of clothes. So apart from a few terrified conjectures whispered round firesides, or thoughts of, as suggested by the Catholic Church, divine intervention for the sins of humanity, people put the deserted homes and empty ramparts down to raiders. And as to the dried up wells and springs, they had no theories whatsoever. Foreign battle customs, they would say, shaking their heads. Taking our people away naked as the day they were born, leaving their clothes behind to mock us. Disgusting. Those Viking barbarians have no shame. Yes, the hungry ones had quietly had things all their own way for many years. But this was the first time anyone had ever come between them and their intended victims. And they were determined that it would be the last. A shiver of unease rippled through their colony. Those 2 brats, troublesome, interfering, and yes, powerful, surprisingly powerful for one so small. Fortunately, they do not yet realize the extent of their own abilities, and they will not be allowed to find out. Get them. Hunt them down. That night, the hungry ones hovered over the area, scanning every bit of forest, beach, riverbank, field and village. Their gaze fell upon Balin Skellig. There, in the darkness, 2 very bright little lights. Yes, we have them. Next day, every child in Balin Skellig was packed off to gather mushrooms in the forest and told not to come back till their baskets were full. November was an excellent time for fungi in Ireland. Seps, puffballs, chanterelles, all delicious, all good for the pot. Madrigal and her 2 sisters were sitting on the ground, putting everything they gathered into piles, according to whether it was tasty, more or less edible, or would give you the farting squits. They were elaborately ignoring Geraldo and the other boys, all of whom were absorbed in Piss Up a Tree, a contest designed to see who could send a yellow jet of wee furthest up an old oak's trunk. Nice, pronounced Madrigal's elder sister, looking firmly the other way. Like anyone cares, said the cousin, with the blistering scorn only found in 12-year-old girls putting down 13-year-old males. Boys, sniffed Madrigal. And then it came. A dark wind roaring in out of nowhere, blowing huts flat, ripping cloaks from shoulders, bending tree branches, sweeping up first Geraldo, then Madrigal. Smothering them in whirling fog, pinning their arms to their sides, spinning them round and round and up and up and up. They heard the piercing screams of the other children, but they could not shout back nor even catch their breath as they were swept up and up and up into the storm-spinning sky. When the wild wind stopped, the 2 friends could neither move nor speak. They tried to breathe, but there was no air. They tried to swallow, but their throats were closed. Their arms were too heavy to lift, their eyes sightless. They could not turn their heads, blink, speak, sob, or sigh. They heard the crash of waves and the scream of gulls and smelled salt. Suddenly they felt themselves flying through the air and landing with a shattering crash. As the shock subsided, warily, they reached out to each other with their thoughts. "Are you okay?" "Yeah. You?" "Just about." "What happened?" "I don't know. But I think we're on a beach." "But why can't we see? Why can't we move? What's the matter with us?" I know this sounds mad, but I think someone has trapped us in a stone." Time passed. Days, weeks, decades, centuries of time. Geraldo and Madrigal could not tell how long, for there were no sunrises or sunsets to measure its passing. The children's minds shut down, and they slept. They slept and they slept a merciful magical sleep for 700 years, imprisoned hand in hand in a round little chunk of grey rock. Then one day, they were abruptly woken by a woman's excited voice and felt themselves being lifted up. "Look, Colm! Oh, do look! Oh, this one's so cute! See the pattern? It's like two little faces." Inside the stone, the children, now half awake, dared to hope for rescue. It didn't happen. "You and your imagination," laughed the man's voice. "Chuck it away, Maura. We've got more beach stones back at the flat than we know what to do with already. Come on, let's go back to the car." And once again, Geraldo and Madrigal felt themselves flying through the air and landing with a jarring crash. Flat? Car? What were those? This happened several times over the next few decades. Again and again they were chosen, lifted up and exclaimed over. Again and again they were thrown away. Then on the first day of summer, last year— "Hey, cool," murmured a new voice. The boys. "Oh, here we go," thought Madrigal. "He'll find another one he likes better in a minute and drop us again, just like all the rest." But then, sunsets and stars, the children felt the sway of a walk. 10 minutes later, a brief wobble. The boy had put the stone on the cluttered desk in his bedroom. That night, the boy, a 14-year-old surfing addict called Kyle, who lived at Inch Beach near Ballinskellig, slept appallingly. Asleep, he kept dreaming of two tousled children standing hand in hand, a boy and a girl, one with silver and one with red hair. They seemed to be looking at him with urgent appeal on their faces. Awake, he felt restless and thirsty and could not get those faces out of his mind. Asleep, he saw them even more clearly, and for some reason the sight of them made him almost unbearably sad. All night long, the images of those children burned into his brain, flickered behind his closed eyelids, and they would not let him rest. Part 2. The Fire That Does Not Burn. Next morning, Kyle picked the stone up off the desk and squinted at it. Didn't look any different from the day before. It was still dark grey, round, smooth, with those two faces, apparently drawn in white streaks. The boy sniffed it, shook it, turned it over, but saw nothing unusual. So he put it back on a pile of surf gear brochures he'd been mooning over yesterday, dreaming he could afford that hot razor light board, a steal at €400. Not. 8 a.m. he was out of the door and trudging into the corner shop, where he bought a can of Red Bull and 2 packets of Buenos, hoping they might perk him up a bit. The newspapers stared out at him from their neat rows above the confectionery. Headlines shouted for his attention. One in particular caught his eye. Mysterious disappearance of local family. Kyle peered closer. It said that in a tiny village near Killarney, the police had found 4 piles of clothes in a kitchen, but no sign of the people who'd been living there only the day before. The work of a cult was suspected, or possibly, suggested the article, spontaneous combustion. That's freaky, thought Kyle. It's the 3rd time this year, too. He looked up to see Mr. O'Neill, who ran the shop, huffing and dumping a pile of coloured leaflets into the bin. What's that, then? No well blessing this Sunday after all. That was all the flyers for it. Why not? Loads of people go every year. They've gone off religion, have they? St. Michael's Wells run dry. Haven't you heard? 2 days ago, just like all the others, and no one knows why. Mrs. Mulrooney's ranting mad. She spent all year growing flowers just to decorate it, replied the shopkeeper, scrubbing at a sticky patch on his counter with a scrap of manky grey t-shirt. And Father Robert having to do the whole show in church instead with bottled holy water from Rome and a plastic washing-up bowl, instead of having people standing round the well on the cliff top like always. It's not fitting. Carl couldn't bring himself to mind that much about the church service. He prided himself on not doing religion, apart from when his school frog-marched everybody to weekly mass. But yeah, it was odd, no doubt about that. So was last night. He snapped the ring off the Red Bull, downed it in one, then promptly had a coughing fit that lasted all the way to the bus shelter where he and his friends always picked up the school coach. There was no one else there. That was odd too. He'd usually meet Fergal, Mikey and Eof at least. Probably all still asleep. Certainly wished he was. Exhausted, heavy-eyed and seriously grumpy, he had never felt less like going to class in his life. To cap it all, he had a mock GCSE maths today. Well, that was going to bomb. "Busy night," said a voice. Carl looked up. A small man, wearing a stained green hoodie, woolly green beanie hat, with a straggly orange beard, was sitting on the bench right next to him. The boy noticed he had very bright green eyes and was wolfing down a peanut butter chunky like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted in his entire life. Carl blinked and edged away slightly. Where'd he sprung from? "Yeah, you could say that," he muttered, pulling out his phone and going straight to Twitter to discourage further conversation. Ought to rename it Twatter, he thought sourly, spotting a ranting tweet from some angry teetotaler, insisting that the only way to stop drunken teenagers vomiting in the streets every Saturday night was to up the legal age for buying booze to 21. Immediately. The man had 752 followers, too. No wonder it was so hard to get a decent underage drink in this town. "Been on the batter, have we?" "I have not," answered Kyle shortly. The little man was not discouraged. "Maybe it's that stone," he continued without any particular emphasis. Kyle blinked. "Huh? How did you—" "Those children. Would I be right?" They need your help." To Carl's intense relief, the red single-decker coach came lumbering round the corner. "My bus. I've got to go to school. Excuse me." "It's got to be you that does it," called the little man as Carl stumbled up the steps, catching his backpack in the closing doors. "Like it or not, you've been chosen, Kyle. You won't get any peace now." Obviously, Carl decided, sitting down in the back row with his friends. The little guy was bonkers. But on the other hand, how had he known about that stone? The whole of the rest of that week, the boy had a very trying time. Every single night, the children came to him in his dreams. He'd wake up several times with their faces in his head and a sense of urgency which is getting stronger by the day. That was worrying enough in itself. But when he remembered that Green Hoodie Man had actually called him by his name, he started worrying even more. On the Friday, Kyle was slumped at the bus stop with his head in his hands, feeling like he had cotton wool for brains and diving weights for feet. "Dear me, you do look rough." The boy looked up. Sure enough, there was the little man again, eyes crinkling with amusement, hoodie dirtier than ever. This time he was eating a banana and swigging from a bottle of strawberry yazoo. "Breakfast. Best meal of the day," he said cheerfully, indicating his supplies. "Now then, let's get down to business. Want to know how to stop all this?" Carl briefly considered, pretending to have no idea what he was talking about, and then nodded miserably. He felt utterly defeated, and the only thing he really wanted to do was sleep for a week. "Grand. Best come with me then." "But school? No, I have to. I mean, my mum will go mad if they ring up and say I've bumped off." "Never bunked off school before?" "My, what a good boy." Carl bristled. "Well, sure I have. Lots of times. It's just..." "Well, come on then. What are you waiting for? Turn round 3 times and each time say Rainbow's End." "You what?" "Just do it, okay?" On impasse, Carl stood up, folded his arms and shouted, "Feck it! Rainbow's End, Rainbow's End, Rainbow's End. Whoa!" The whole landscape quivered, then shifted. When it stabilised again, they were on Ballinskellig Beach in front of its ruined abbey. A double rainbow arched across the sky over the sea. One end seemed to be slap bang in front of him. Carl boggled. "Man, that was cool. That was mental. How did you do it?" Little reality wrinkling, nothing to it. Reality wrinkling? If you concentrate hard enough, you can wrinkle up reality like a concertina to be somewhere else immediately. Space-time compression, pure quantum physics. Don't they teach you anything at that school of yours? There was a long pause as Kyle stared at him, still reeling from their abrupt arrival. "Who are you, dude?" The little man considered. "You can call me Marvel," he suggested, "like in the comics." "Is that really your name?" "No. Now then, what colours do you see out there?" he demanded, pointing at the rainbows arcing before them. "Red, yellow, blue, orange, indigo, green, violet. Everyone knows that." "Exactly. We're being shown 7 colours. That means 7 tasks. Then the magic can come in. Freeing people from stone enchantments isn't easy. It takes time, skill and courage. I've got the skill, but we need your courage and your time. Let's hope you've got them. Or I'm telling you, now you're mixed up in this, you'll never get a good night's sleep again." Okay. You've got me," mumbled Carl, running his hands through his thick black hair so it stuck out all over the place like a hedgehog. "I'll do your tasks, whatever. I will do anything you like if those kids will just go away and leave me alone." "But what do they want? And who are they anyway?" "Let's just say those 2 children have something Ireland is badly in need of." "That all the background I get?" "For now. Recite the colours again, one at a time. Each represents something you need to find to unleash the magic. Begin." Carl glared. "Jesus, the mouth on you. All right, red." The lips of a beloved, the blood of a raven, the rage of a wrong man, the glow of cooling iron. Take your pick. I'll have to find one of them and bring it to me. Kyle tugged at the hem of his animal surf hoodie distractedly. This just got weirder and weirder. Red, lips, beloved. Yeah. Suppose I get one of my mum's red lipsticks. She's beloved, kind of. Reckon Dad loves her anyway, when she's in a decent mood. The leprechaun, for that was what he was, as he'd probably twigged by now, nodded briefly. "That would do at a pinch. Next. Yellow." The little man closed his eyes thoughtfully. The earring of a pirate. The wedding band of a new married man. A drop of honey from Queen Bee's own larders. Dustbeams in the sunshine. Well, no pirates round here unless you count Fat Boy Pirates Rap Club down in Dingle, and that's a right dive. No new married bloke is going to give me his wedding ring, no way. Maybe the honey. That all comes from the Queen Bee's larders, right? Marvel inclined his head briefly. What we've got a bit of honeycomb from the health shop at home. How about a piece of that? Adequate. Next colour. Green. Marvel grinned. Snot of an orc. Shoe of an elf. Tears of a frog, tongue of a lizard, toe jam of a giant, fart juice of a troll. There are orcs and trolls round here. You're kidding me, right? Ever been up there? Alone? At night? Retorted Marvel, indicating the dark mountains across the water. Carl shook his head. Orcs? Giants? Why not? Today he would not have been surprised to find Darth Vader, Batman and Gollum sitting on his bed playing poker when he got home. And what's fart juice? If you don't know, trust me, you really don't want to. Well, anything to do with giants, trolls or orcs is out, said Kyle firmly. There is no way I'm cutting out anything's tongue, ever. Look, I threw up when they made me dissect an earthworm in biology, so that takes care of the lizard thing. Tears of a frog... Hey, my little sister Kyra's got a stuffed green cuddly one with kind of silver glitter around its eyes. What if I snipped off a bit of that? That looks like tears. Sort of. Thinking outside the box, smiled Marvel. Not magical in the usual sense, but creative. I like it, yes. Oh, and best stay clear of troll farts. The stench alone can kill a man. Next. Purple? The heart of a storm. The vanity of royalty. The scent of lilac. The mark of a lightning strike. Maybe I could take an image of the next lightning storm on my phone. Might not be one for ages. Think again. Kyle did so hard. What if I squash some lilac flowers onto a bit of bog paper, so the scent comes out, and bring you that? He suggested eventually. Acceptable. But make it a cotton handkerchief at least, if you please. Linen's even better. It's a respect thing. Next colour. Blue. Eyes of a blonde newborn. Scales of a week-old mackerel. A sapphire from the necklace of the Tuatha De Danan's queen. And the sparkle of the sea in midsummer. Take your pick. Carl reflected the baby's eyes were obviously out of the question. A week-old mackerel would stink, and no one had ever proved that the Tuatha De Danann even existed, let alone clapped eyes on the queen's fabled jewellery. He looked at the water. The rainbows arcing above it were fading, but the sea was blue as a cornflower. How about I bring you some of that? He offered, pointing. Very well. Next. Orange. Heat of a forge. Hair of an Irish redhead, centre of a conch shell, wing of a butterfly. Da's cousin Sinead works at Techno Heads in Tralee. They must get a few red hair sweepings in there. Would those do? Grand. What useful family connections you have. Carl wondered if he was being sarcastic, but let it go. Better get started then, said Marvel. I get no rest till it's done, so the sooner you finish the better. Can you remember all those things? Lock of ginger hair, blue sea, crushed purple lilac, bit of silver glitter off my sister's stuffed frog, she's going to kill me if she finds out, a piece of yellow honeycomb and my mam's red lipstick, recited Kyle. Doesn't sound like much. All magic involves a measure of improvisation. It's not so much what things are, Marvel assured him, it's what they represent. But haven't you forgotten one? Oh, yeah, indigo. A sliver of night sky just before dawn. Tongue of a boar gorged on wild blueberries. Burnt metal. The cloak of an Irish king. Oak galling. Well, I saw tungsten go that colour in a chemistry experiment at school. Perfect. But they only do it once a year for year 8. It's set fire to metal. So how do I get that? What do you want me to do? Steal some and set fire to it myself? That's the spirit, said Marvel cheerfully. Off you go then. Remember, 7 days, 7 colours, 7 objects. Be sure to do one task each day without fail, or this is never going to work. Why not? 7 is a magical number, okay? So 7 times 7 times 7, even more so. 3 being a magical number in itself. Just stick with the numbers. You mess them up, you'll mess everything. Then as Kyle looked at him, the leprechaun began to disappear. Already he could partially see through him. "Wait! Where shall I find you?" "Our usual place, at midnight on the 7th night, and remember you must have every single item in a watertight container with you." "Why watertight?" "You'll find out. Oh, and bring your board too, boogie, not surf, and stuff for a beach fire." Though now almost invisible, Kyle quite distinctly saw him take another swig of milkshake. "It's a good job you're a strong swimmer." That sounded ominous. "Can you wrinkle me back home then?" asked the boy, rubbing his eyes. Now the adrenaline rush of his first exposure to magic was wearing off. He felt shattered again. And, though he'd sooner have eaten slug pellets than admit it, rather nervous. "Don't be lazy," replied Marvel. "You've got feet." And he vanished completely into thin, salty air. 2 seconds later he was back, but just his head. It was floating 5 feet above the ground. "Man!" shrieked Carl, his hair standing on end. "Don't do that!" "Sorry, forgot to say you'll need a wetsuit too," grinned the little man. "That Roxy one hanging on the back of your Dar's garage will do." "Have you been snooping round our garage as well?" sputtered the boy. But Marvel had gone again. It was 5 minutes to midnight, 7 days later, and Kyle stood shivering at the bus stop. In one hand he was clutching the 7 colours of a rainbow items, plus 3 firelighters, a box of Cook's matches, and 6 briquettes cut into pieces, all packed into his mum's biggest Tupperware cake box. In the other, he held the strap of his battered boogie board. His dad's wetsuit was slung over his shoulder, and in his fist he clutched a couple of bungee cords. There was no sign of Marvel. None at 10 past, 15 past, or 20 past either. Carl gritted his teeth and turned to leave. Total waste of time. And what was he supposed to do with the stone children now? Chuck them back on the beach? "Going somewhere, were we?" came a voice from somewhere down round his ankles, and there stood Marvel, eyes greener than ever, but only 6 inches high. "Holy St. Bridget!" yelped Carl, staring at him in disbelief. "What happened to you?" "Apologies for my lateness. Unforeseen circumstances." "No, not that. Why are you so... so..." He caught Marvel's gaze on him, positively daring Carl to mention his height. "Compact?" "Happens sometimes," snapped the leprechaun. "Totally random, most inconvenient. Right," he added firmly, clearly not wishing to discuss this further. "We'll be off down the beach. I want to ride on your shoulder, mind?" The beach gleamed silver in the moonlight, and the darkened sea was looking glass calm. A mile away, the undulating outline of darker dark showed the sacred hills across the water. "That's where we're going," said Marvel quietly, pointing straight at them. "Those hills? But we've got no boat." "Exactly. Boats attract too much attention, see? Need to keep this one below the radar or they'll clock us. That's what your boogie board is for. That and you'll find strong legs." "You want me to board you all the way over there?" "Reality check. It's like a whole mile away, maybe 2. And another thing. Who's they?" "They have no name but very long ears," replied Marvel curtly. "So all things considered, it's best we don't talk about them." Carl grunted, but slipped into his wetsuit, strapped the box to his back with the bungee cords, and waded into the sea, lying belly down on his board as the water reached waist height. The leprechaun perched, rather uncomfortably for both of them, on Carl's head, hanging onto the roots of his hair. "Ow! Go easy, Willie, that's attached," he muttered as Marvel took an especially firm grip of his fringe. The next 2 hours were very challenging for the boy, and not in a good way. Carl paddled with his arms and kicked his legs for all he was worth. But as the sea heaved darkly beneath him, he found himself wondering what lay below the surface, something which had never bothered him before, and hoping very much it was not something large, with teeth. Like a big shark, or a medium-sized sea monster, Or possibly the legendary black ghostfish of Glenby. Or, oh, stop that, he told himself angrily. Just stop it and focus. But though he paddled and paddled and paddled, he seemed to be getting no nearer to those hills. In fact, was it possible they were actually moving further away? Carl's legs began to feel heavy. He developed a searing cramp in his right calf. His shoulder muscles burned with strain. Then as a wave rolled up and smacked him in the face, he swallowed a gollop of seawater, coughing and coughing, with Marvel clinging onto his head for dear life until he thought his throat would burst. When the fit subsided, he just knew he couldn't go any further and lay hopelessly, chin down on his board, wondering how on earth they were going to reach the shore. Any shore. All right, you did your best, conceded Marvel. Time to go warp drive. Hang on. The board lurched, shuddered, and then to Car's great alarm and everlasting delight, it took off like a speedboat. It hurtled along, the boy clinging on for dear life, reaching the island in minutes, where it promptly powered straight out of the sea, shot across the beach, only coming to a crashing halt when it ploughed into a sand dune. Man, that was mental, smirked Marvel, rolling off Carl's head as the boy staggered stiffly to his feet. Wasn't it? But we'd have still been there this time next week otherwise. Look, you did okay, he added, slapping Carl heartily on the knee, which was about as high as he could currently reach. You tried your very best, with positive intent and a willing heart. And that, according to the rules of magic, is often enough. Carl collapsed onto the sand and then lay there on his back, staring mindlessly at the stars wheeling above him, trying to breathe and wondering if there was any bit of him that didn't hurt. No time to slug about. Come on, the moon's already setting, urged Marvel, poking him in the ribs. We haven't got that long. Our fire must be burnt out by the sunrise, or we've failed. What fire? Asked Carl reasonably enough. The sorcerer's fire we've got to build in order to trigger the magic. What do you think those briquettes were for? Breakfast? Don't just lie there like a stranded cuttlefish. Get up and help me. Under Marvel's guidance, Carl made a stone circle with 21 beach pebbles, 3 times 7. Around the outside, the leprechaun carefully positioned the 7 rainbow colour objects. First, the red lipstick, then the piece of yellow honeycomb, then the lock of orange hair, then the scrap of green material with silver glitter. Next went Carl's little glass bottle containing some drops of what had been blue summer sea water, now looking clear and rather ordinary, the linen handkerchief with the purple lilac scent, and lastly, a small piece of tungsten burnt violet, blue and silver from Carl having held it with his mum's salad service over the gas ring in their kitchen the previous night. 7 colours, 7 tasks, all done. In the centre of the beach, they made a pile of driftwood bleached dry by the sun, after putting little pieces of briquette underneath it to encourage the flames to catch. Marvel placed the stone, very carefully, in the middle, and snapped his fingers. Matches! The fire leapt into life and was soon crackling furiously as yellow-orange flames consumed the wood. Streaks of green, blue, silver and violet began to flicker through it as golden sparks spat high into the air. It looks like a beautiful firework, Carl thought dreamily. What's with the colours? Is that part of the magic? No, sodium chloride and iodine get left behind when seawater dries out, replied Marvel briskly. They really don't teach you anything at that school, do they? Now then, over to you. Since the stone came into your hands, you must be the one that asks the children to come out. Tell them it is time now. Tell them they are safe. Marvel, we both know you're cracked, but that's verging on the insane. I am not talking to a stone. You have seen the children. You know they're real, so speak to them. You were chosen, although, he muttered almost to himself, St. Patrick alone knows why. I can't. I feel stupid. That may be a reason, but it is not an excuse. Carl looked awkward and hung his head, a mulish expression on his face. Realising he really wasn't going to get anywhere, the leprechaun sighed heavily and sat down cross-legged in front of the fire. As the coloured light played across his face and the sea shifted and murmured in the darkness, he began a song into the night. The voice sounded nothing like his own, so powerful it made the very stones of the beach shake. As Carl watched, the stone began to move and then rolled to and fro in the heart of the fire, which was beginning to burn lower. The leprechaun crouched and watched it intently for a moment and then barked, "Bring more wood. We need more heat, more fire." The boy scuttled about looking for extra driftwood. He found several pieces and was just picking up a large bunch of dry seaweed for good measure when he heard Marvel shout, "Hurry! Hurry! It's going out. If the flames die, the children die too." Suddenly afraid, the boy came racing back, slipping and stumbling in the deep, soft sand to hurl a lot onto the dying fire. Instantly it flared up, blazing blue, saffron and green, sending bright streaks of pink in every direction. At intervals, the original colours of the flames, red, yellow and orange, would ignite, and then blue, green and purple flashes would streak through the dark. More and more and more colour came until the blaze looked like an incandescent ball of rainbow light. "This can't just be salt and iodine," thought Kyle, entranced, for the flames were growing bigger by the moment. Soon they had enveloped the entire beach, wrapping Kyle and Marvel in a burning haze of colour which flashed and glowed all around them, yet did not burn them. As the enchanted fire reached its height, inside the stone the eyes of Geraldo and Madrigal flickered open, and the dense, freezing confinement of rock that had trapped them began to warm, and then to melt. The children started moving. At first this felt like pushing through lightly packed soil, then kind of thick honey, then running water, until suddenly they stumbled forwards out of the fire to land sprawling on their faces on the sand. The leprechaun, back to his full height now, helped them up and dusted them off. "Welcome back, little ones," he said formally. "You have long been away." "Jesus alive," was the best Carl could manage in a very small voice. The children shook themselves, yawned and rubbed their faces. They clutched each other's hands, their eyes flickered all around, and they looked nervous, as if waking from a bad dream that had felt far too real. Next, they began to stretch and wriggle their shoulders. As they discovered they could move freely once more, the anxiety left their faces. Geraldo jumped up and down experimentally. Madrigal broke into a few swaying dance steps and began to spin around and around with her arms held out wide. They examined their own hands, waggled their feet, touched each other's hair, and began to laugh and laugh, hugging each other breathlessly. "We're back! We're back! Woohoo! We're back!" Finally, they threw their arms round Marvel. "Thank you," they beamed, tears in their eyes. "Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you." Next they came towards Kyle. Geraldo hugged his left shoulder hard, and Madrigal kissed his right cheek as they passed lightly on either side of him. "And now what?" asked Marvel, smiling broadly, regarding them with one eyebrow raised as they stood behind Kyle. "We have to go. It feels like there's work to do," replied Geraldo. "Work that has waited 700 years. We could do stuff before, you know, all sorts of good stuff. But after your rainbow fire, I think we could do even more now." "Indeed," agreed the leprechaun. "Of that I have no doubt. But, forgive an old man for being nosy, but what sort of work did you have in mind?" "Yeah, things have been getting pretty whacked out round here," added Kyle eagerly. "Dried up sacred springs, people disappearing. Can you two sort us out then?" Geraldo shrugged. "Not sure yet, but we'll do our best. Come on, Madrigal. Something tells me it's this way." And with that, and with more grateful smiles, they took each other's hands again and began walking away down the beach. Their hair gleamed red and silver, in the light of the rising dawn. "Is that it? I mean, do you need to... that is, can we do anything else for you?" called out Kyle to their departing backs. Both turned. "Well, breakfast would be good. We've had nothing to eat for 700 years, replied Madrigal with a grin. "But don't worry, we'll find ourselves something." And with that, they waved cheerfully and continued to walk away towards the hills that sloped down to the beach. Now the faintest of early morning lights was blooming on the eastern horizon. Kyle was able to see that the children's tread left no marks in the sand. He glanced over his shoulder at the fire. It had burned out. When he looked back again, they had gone. Six weeks later, small news items began popping up in the press. First, a few local tourist and parish council websites, then the Kerry News, but eventually even the Irish Times and Irish Examiner. Miracle of the waters, sacred streams flow again, and once in the Irish Sun. Well. It appeared that several of the sacred wells, which inexplicably dried up over the last few years, were suddenly full again, and the sacred streams were flowing. Starting with the famous St. Michael's Well overlooking Ballinskellig on the Ring of Kerry. The spot which just happened to have a stunning view over the water to the islands where Geralda and Madrigal were freed from the stone by Kyle's rainbow fire. No one could understand it. Eminent researchers of geophysics and geology put the whole thing down to fluctuations in the water table. A shy professor of hydrogeology at Trinity College Dublin was equally clueless, though when bullied for a press quote, she muttered something about freak shifts in the tectonic plates running northeast to southwest across Ireland. The Church Fathers hailed the whole thing as a modern-day miracle and held special prayer services of thanks at the site of each well and stream, with more in their churches. The additional members of congregation this attracted paid for many improvements in church roofs and gave Ireland's declining church-going numbers a welcome, if temporary, lift. Over the next 2 years, the mysterious disappearances of people from isolated farmhouses and cottages also tailed off and then stopped altogether. To date, there have been no further reports. Kyle, currently taking his A-levels, is the only person in Ireland who knows why, even though he has no idea what the children had actually done to put things right. And there was no one to ask, because to his great regret he never did see Marvel again. Though he still thinks of him and smiles every time he sees a straggly ginger beard, someone wearing a grubby green hoodie, particularly if it's a really dirty one, or eating a peanut butter chunky.